Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and in this video I want to share my favorite classical history books that I've read so far here in 2024. So these are going to be books dealing with the Greco-Roman world and its context, stuff like that. I've also done one on modernish history, my favorite science books, and my favorite 2024 releases so far. So if those interest you more than this one, definitely check out the description down below to find those. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get started with an honorable mention. So the first one is going to be The Crown Games of Ancient Greece: Archaeology, Athletes, and Heroes by David Lunt. Now this was a book that I came across when I was looking and perusing books for my video on ancient Greece, or excuse me, ancient Greek releases that I had missed when I wasn't really doing booktube and stuff. And this one came out a couple of years ago, but I'm really glad I read it. There's another one as well that I mentioned in that video on the Olympic Games as well. And I think I've read I want to say three or four other books specifically on the Olympic Games. But what's interesting about this one is it's not so much focused on the athletic competitions themselves. It's really more about kind of like the context that the games are in, as in like the 4 different crown games, which you know, most people have heard of the games at Olympia and stuff. There's also the Nemean games, the Isthmian games, and the Pythian games as well. But it's kind of more of like how the Greek world viewed these. They were almost like giant, festival activity things that happened. Technically, it actually happened 6 times every 4 years, because the Nemean games and the Isthmian games actually occurred twice in a 4-year cycle. So some years you had two festivals to go to, whatever. But what was interesting, like I'm saying, is it's more about how how the Greeks interacted with the games, like people using them as sort of diplomatic kind of summits, you could say, between different city-states. You know, there's a lot of kind of religious ceremony, a lot of things kind of going on behind the scenes, not necessarily just the athletic competitions. And I liked how other competitions were also included, such as kind of the dramatic stuff, like poetry and everything like that, especially at the Pythian and Isthmian games. So yeah, it was definitely really interesting, and the book takes a very hard slant with archaeological evidence instead of just using kind of the primary sources. Just tons of stuff. For example, at Nemea, just realizing how the Nemean games are I think there was only a few little time periods during the 800 or 900 years they were being held, that they were actually held in kind of run by Nemea, because due to the Greek city-states at each other's throats, as they were wont to do. Argos actually had control of the site and just kind of moved everything over to their place, whenever there was contested with them and everything like that. So it was definitely really interesting, just seeing the actual structures that were there, kind of the different kind of obviously you have the temples and things like that, the different kinds that were at different places. The giant, one of the wonders of the world, the Olympian Zeus is held at Olympia and everything. But you have a lot of just commercial buildings and stuff, where traders and everything would set up shop temporarily, stuff like that. But I just had a really good time learning about Olympian stuff, and now I'm going to be on to the other one, which I think is called The First Physical Culturists. And I think that's going to be the opposite slant. It's going to be focusing on the games more or less just as the athletic contests themselves, rather than this more pan-Hellenic cultural overview that this book was. So, but anyways, like I said, I really enjoyed it, and it's just kind of fun reading books on the same topic, but from different angles. Next up, we have Pertinax by Simon Elliott, the son of a slave who became a Roman emperor. And I do have a longer book review just on, or book video just on this book if you want to check this one out. But for those who've seen the movie Gladiator, there's a lot of historical nonsense kind of going on there. But when the Roman Emperor Commodus, and that's portrayed there in Gladiator, when he dies, we'll just say Pertinax, after the assassination attempt, kind of reluctantly is sort of forced into becoming emperor. But it's kind of interesting in how this book deals with a lot of the context leading up to Pertinax, becoming emperor. He started off life as a freedman, as the son of a freedman. So his father was a slave who eventually earned his freedom. But him earning his freedom allowed his son to be a Roman citizen and everything. And he was a grammarian, he was a teacher for quite a while, and then he just kind of joined the military, and it's I want to say it was his 30s, and that's very unusual in this time period, but he had a really good patron and everything, and he kind of just rose to the ranks through being just very like kind of rigorous with his like morals and ethics and everything like that, and his like, you know, just work attitude and stuff. And he actually did just sort of kept rising through the ranks, and he eventually was kind of, you know, the emperorship is sort of thrust upon him. The problem is he was only emperor for about 3 or 4 months there, because he kind of did want to clean house a little bit. He was like, you know, the Praetorian Guard's getting a little out of hand and everything. The problem with that is if you do a little bit too fast, you know, they kind of did what they always seem to do during the imperial era and turned on him. So you definitely see, I like how the book kind of has a lot of the cultural context of Roman history and stuff in there. For example, like, you know, the first opening chapters is dealing with like schooling, you know, how did he, like, you know, maybe, you know, become educated, stuff like that. But also the whole concept of manumission of slavery, and also like patronage and client relationships, stuff like that, just to kind of set the context. And I felt those actually were quite well done. But like I said, just a really interesting emperor that a lot of people haven't heard of, but I think just kind of important. You know, after he's assassinated, the Praetorians literally, and like no joke, hold the seat of the emperor like up for auction, like just to the highest bidder, like no joke. So that was just how crazy the times were during kind of the really tail end there of the 2nd century CE there. All right, next up we have a book that I listened to in audiobook format, and it is How to Be: Life Lessons from the Early Greeks, and this is by Adam Nicholson. He's got a whole bunch of books on like quite a wide variety of topics, but like one that I missed that I need to get to is Life Between the Tides. But anyways, I do have a soft spot for like the early Greek intellectuals, the early Greek kind of pre-Socratic philosophers, which is what this book is sort of about quite a bit. And also might as well just plug my philosophy Discord down below if you're interested in learning more about philosophy. We're just you know, just talking about different things, and we try to read some stuff together each month. But anyways, like I said, I have a soft spot for the pre-Socratics. You know, you got like Heraclitus, you know, Thales, Anaximander, Democritus, Epicurus, you know, Pythagoras, all of them. And what the book does is Nicholson sort of asks a vague question like, how should I be, you know, or can I live multiple realities, things like that. And then he takes what these early like pre-Socratic philosophers kind of thought, but he kind of brings it into like a very like he just does such a good job making them feel contemporary, and how they're like points and everything, and kind of, even though a lot of it is fragmentary, we don't have any of their like complete works and stuff, unfortunately. Just how, I guess, how close to like the modern age they can still like be. You know, they're not just, oh, they're 2,500 years old. They're, you know, even a couple hundred years before Plato sometimes, you know, they're just kind of useless. He definitely shows that they're totally not. So he writes in a very like kind of very thoughtful, very kind of like almost like scholarly way, without it reading like academic in any way, shape, or form. So I that might not make like a whole lot of sense, but I think I've read 2 others of his books. He has another one too, The Shorebirds Cry, that I need to get to, but one that I did really enjoy too was Why Homer Matters, things like that. So he's got a whole, like I said, just a bunch of really cool stuff. I guess I gotta like look up his whole bibliography, but if you're interested in like really early Greek thought and how it can still apply to this day and age, that is definitely a book you should check out. Very well written too. Like, it's just a pleasure to, well, granted I like listened to it this time, but just a very pleasurable experience. And then lastly, probably the best one here, but it's kind of one of those weird ones. I don't, you know, is it really classical history or is it medieval history? It's one of the ones that definitely straddles the 2 time periods like perfectly. Essentially, it's a book on like late antiquity, and it's Ravenna, Capital of Empire, Crucible of Europe by Judith Herod. And I do have a individual video on this book as well, just reviewing just this one, if you're interested in that. But yeah, so this is sort of a history of about, you know, the late, I'd say the late 300s to about 700. So, you know, perfectly right smack dab in the middle of like, you know, classical history and like early medieval and stuff. But definitely like appeared on the late antiquity. But, you know, since it's kind of dealing with, you know, Ravenna's role in the fall of, well, not its role per se in the fall of the West, but kind of what was going on in Ravenna during this time period where it was the capital of the western half of the Roman Empire for a while. I just figured there's definitely a lot more continuity with, you know, the antique world, you know, the classical world, than necessarily the medieval world, even like towards the end of the book and stuff. So anyways, I put it in this one, but just really fantastic. It is quite a big book. It's very high quality, tons of really cool plates. So when you're like learning about the different, you learn about different like artifacts and archaeology and like different sites and everything in Ravenna, like in the different like churches, different stuff like that, the emperors or the warlords, I guess, kind of running it, like what was kind of going on there. I really enjoyed it too, because there's a few characters in the Fall of the West, like namely Aetius and Stilicho are like some of my favorite individuals to like read about during this time period, and they each almost have like their own little section. This whole time period is roughly broken into about half-century chapters that are fairly large, but I actually found that it did quite well, and it's a really good balance between military kind of political narrative. Obviously there's just a lot going on between, you know, the East and the West, you know, and the different like barbarian threats and this, that, and the other thing, but it definitely shows how Ravenna really was kind of like the cultural hub of, you know, the southern Mediterranean in Western Europe for several centuries, even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So it's just really cool just seeing how like, you know, you always read about Rome, you always hear about Rome and stuff, but there were other, you know, like I said, there were other urban centers that were actually, like, during this time period, far more important than like Rome was. You know, Rome actually had been not necessarily abandoned, but the population had fallen to about like 5%, like what its heyday was. So Rome was definitely kind of like on the outskirts of thing, you know, towards the, you know, the 500s, 600s and stuff. So yeah, just really interesting to learn about. Definitely a different angle with a lot of things, but just had a lot of fun reading it, and I think you'll learn a lot if you're interested in the Fall of the West or late antiquity or the early Middle Ages in Europe and stuff. So definitely a lot going on there. So there you have it. Those are my 4 favorite works that I've read so far this year on kind of Greco-Roman classical history, time periods, things like that. Let me know what your favorites are in that time period. I know a lot of people have favorites on Rome. I feel like I've actually read more on Greece than Rome this year, which is actually kind of nice, because I do kind of almost like prefer Greece, but it doesn't seem to have as many books being published about it. But anyways, whether you're reading books on classical history or not, always remember, read victoriously.